Welcome to Forward with NACCE, Inspiring Entrepreneurial Action, a podcast that shares the stories of everyday entrepreneurs, entrepreneurial leaders, and the communities that support us. We hope that this diverse collection of stories brings you inspiration, inspires you to take action, and ignites entrepreneurship in your community as we make our way forward together.
Welcome to Forward with NACCE. We're excited to have a special guest in our studio today, and we're going to talk about women entrepreneurship. And specifically, we're going to dig in and talk about how universities and colleges can really be supportive in this, whether it's venture funds and a whole host of other things. So let's get right to it. And I'm really happy to welcome Amelia Schaffner from Emory University to the program. So she's going to tell us a little bit about the program she runs, and we want to begin though with just hearing about you as a person. What has been an experience that led you onto the career path that you have today?
Thank you for having me, first of all. It's nice to see everyone. So a lot of my background is being around other entrepreneurs, which I think is something naturally that happens to people that get in the field of entrepreneurship, whether you are an entrepreneur yourself or maybe supporting somebody else that's doing entrepreneurship. So my father was an entrepreneur and a very versatile one at that. So he would pretty much come up with ideas, I would say, not quite one a day, but frequently, and often very visionarily so. So he would think about well ahead of his time, in some cases completely missing the timing because he probably was too early. And so I watched him sort of approach problems that he would see pretty much anywhere. And for example, he went on a trip to Venice one time, and he observed that oftentimes the flooding of the town of Venice would happen because seaweeds would overpopulate the waters. And I know that while that seems like something completely crazy, that you would make nothing of, he actually eventually combined another business of his, which is a business that was absorbing pollution from the water with an actual boat and with an actual vessel, and then absorbed all those seaweeds and turned them into paper, and he made seaweed paper. So, and even then at that point, he was way early with the environmental business, because that was back in the 90s, and he missed a little bit of the mark on that. But I tell that story a little bit to you because it's the first one that kind of came to mind. It always showed me that you need to be looking for different places where problems might be happening and of solving them in peripheral ways. So what else is on my side that I'm solving in one way that I can bring to a different area?
I was just going to say, you're talking a lot about mindset, right? It's
yes.
Shaped you as a young woman, as a girl, and you watched your dad and you sort of adopted that, not only mindset, but that skill in being able to see opportunity. So that kind of lends me, and we're going to talk about your program that you co-founded in a minute, but I would love for you to talk about how maybe women in general, since we're celebrating women entrepreneurs, how might they need additional sort of, I don't want to say support, but maybe the differences that you've observed in your academic career, but also in your life, and how do you really lean into that? I think you were sharing with us earlier about kind of a program that really speaks to really embracing the specialness of women.
Yeah, that's true. And I think, there are differences, despite the fact that oftentimes we say, let's all be the same. The truth is, both on the challenges of, getting access to funding, getting access to opportunity. Many times, statistically, women don't get as much funding. They've made some interesting studies that I found fascinating. When they had women pitch to investors, if you could hear their voice as females, they would get a certain amount of yeses or funding, versus if you did not put that voice, the female voice, and completely sort of robotized or changed that voice, the result was different. So the gender does matter. Sometimes what we find is, first of all, the chain of who is giving funding, for example, might be very much, monogender. And so obviously you tend to be funding who looks like you. And that is true both for female and other underrepresented founders. On the other hand, there is the equation of female founders that sometimes they might be lacking the same confidence potentially, mostly because they're more sort of might be humble in terms of what they're presenting and what they're pitching. And so what I like about some of the programs that we've been partnering with is specifically that focus on building that confidence. One of the programs that we partner with specifically is a program that goes from founder to CEO. And so it brings actually the CEO, the executive person, out of the original founder.
Now, Amelia, is that through your program at Emory University, or is that a volunteer initiative?
That is through one of our partners.
That your partners, okay.
Yes, is in Atlanta. There's a program called Launchpad 2X.
And that seems to be, from what I understand, learning about you, I think both of our organizations were featured in a Times of Higher Ed magazine. So we were both interviewed together, at different times, but really looking at sort of venture capital and how things are changing. Your perspective was looking at university and trying to connect to underrepresented groups. Our focus at NACCE is what we call our Everyday Entrepreneur Venture Fund, which are community college students. Many of them are older students, veterans, people of color, military that may be starting everyday businesses, skilled trades businesses, and so on. So I thought that was an interesting connection between the two. And so tell us a little bit more about the program at Emory. What is it called, and what does it do? And you mentioned one partner, so perhaps you could share with us a little bit more about some of the other partners that you work with.
Yeah, absolutely. So last year was a difficult year in many ways. There was a lot of challenges, a lot of talk about inequity, etc. And our students are incredibly engaged. They started raising some really good questions. So what we did is we set up a project to go interview some people in the community and get a sense directly from founders and investors themselves as to what the main challenge is out there. Why do underrepresented founders find themselves struggling? At the end of this project, the students came up with some recommendations that eventually turned into what I will talk about now, which is the fund that the university funded. The recommendations was to try to put together some capital, because that was the number one missing piece for underrepresented founders, as well over 10% of the whole venture capital goes to this particular demographic. And so the university came up with $1 million to provide to start the Peachtree Minority Venture Fund, which is a student-led fund and run together with actually a classroom course. So there is a classroom that's taught at Gozueta, at our business school, in which students get to learn the mechanics, the fundamentals of the VC world, but they also get to learn about the more societal aspects of it. So, for example, the difficulties, within the DEI space.
Yes, I think that's wonderful, and I think what you're talking about too is really that seed funding. What our experience has been at NACCE is sometimes it doesn't take a lot of money to get started, but if you don't have anything and you don't have access to capital, it's very difficult to get off the ground. And you pointed out too the course, and that's what we found in our Everyday Entrepreneur Venture Fund that has been very successful, is pairing it with either a credit or a non-credit course. And trying to line up mentors, because that was a conversation we were having in terms of the sisterhood. And I know that's important to you. That's very important to us here at Forward with NACCE, and throughout the fabric of even building our board, of intentionally trying to get more women presidents, more women presidents of color, women who are and men who are part of the LGBTQ community, because the diversity of thought and lived experience really makes us healthier organizations. And to that extent, you were sharing with me a little bit about one of your volunteer focus areas where you serve as a board member, the Georgia University Entrepreneurship Initiative. And I thought that was really powerful. So you might share a little bit about that organization, what you do as a board member, and kind of what the impact is that you all make collectively.
Yes, I think what we aligned on there was the fact that sometimes, as a group, we operate better if we collaborate. So Atlanta and Georgia overall has a huge amount of universities and colleges overall. And so what we identified a few years ago is an opportunity to actually share and empower each other rather than compete. So we get together frequently, twice a year in person, and we actually do some real workshopping together. So we discuss what are the key problems, key themes, key challenges, key opportunities that we are working on as peers. So people that are within the universities and colleges focusing on entrepreneurship. We bring in students sometimes, we bring in alumni, we bring in people from the ecosystem overall to share with us what are some opportunities that collectively we can better build together, right? So I think it's a great initiative that I think, I don't know how many other regions have, but I totally encourage, more people to do that, because what we found is sometimes things that sit within one place, one university, or, one college, can be open sometimes also to additional other students across other places. In Atlanta and in Georgia, we also have a number of HBCUs. And so being open to sharing these events, initiatives across campuses opens up not only opportunities for students, but also for us as educators and people in the system to learn about how we might be doing things differently, how we might be, building multidisciplinary opportunities across campuses.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. I mean, really what you hit the nail on the head is really being a lifelong learner. And, we've all experienced that together through the pandemic. It's been very difficult. We've had to, adjust our daily lives in a different way. We've had to communicate differently. And I think the collaborative piece, it strikes me during sort of the celebration of women entrepreneurs, women in general often are more collaborative, because I think that's part of, there are differences, gender differences. And I think the way an entrepreneur thinks, you're thinking, how could I take an asset, a bird in hand asset, or something that may, quite frankly, be a challenge? You pointed out the disparity in venture funding, men versus women. But to some extent, there are some natural advantages. And I think the collaborative piece is really important. What we talk a lot about in our world is the messiness of it. If you expect to collaborate and not have differences of opinion and times where you don't maybe see eye to eye, that you have to really lean into that and try to figure it out. But I think the spirit of entrepreneurship is really one where you really embrace the journey, and that not everything is going to go perfectly. I would love for you to talk a bit more about the financial end of things, and people who are listening to this broadcast around the world, maybe they don't really understand what venture capital is, and they may not see the connection between the work that you do at the university and this. So maybe you could give us a little bit of a deeper explanation about it, and maybe an example of it. A student that has come through your center, or someone that you've worked with that has gotten some venture funding and was able to launch a business.
Yes. So first of all, a bit of background that I always look at entrepreneurship. There's two sides. That on one side, the startup itself, how you launch the business, et cetera. But on the other side, how do you fuel the energy to actually keep going and growing. And, within our center, we do focus not so much only on mainstream, but we actually focus on more scalable opportunities. And that's where capital becomes super important from our perspective. So in order to make a business really grow and scale, you can certainly fund it through revenue, which is obviously the first way that we want, our businesses to succeed. If you have a good concept, clearly customers are going to be the first ones fueling that business. But in order to make it, obviously much bigger in size, many times you will need some form of capital. So typically the entrepreneurs that we serve are very, very early stage. And so the first step that entrepreneurs take is going to family and friends, and then they will go into angel investors, which are generally local, either other entrepreneurs or people that have succeeded in other areas and that have some funds to invest in early stage ideas. That is more, there's not a very structured process around that, although in Atlanta, for example, in our area, there are many angel network groups. So there are people that support each other, as investors, to share what they think about specific opportunities. The next level up, which is more a bit more structured, is the venture capital world, and that is where you start seeing a bit more structure around how do you pipeline ideas that can be invested in. But typically, the venture capital world is where you have a number of limited partners who will bring in a certain amount of capital that they share together in one pool, in one fund. And then that is where you can have somebody to manage that particular capital. And so obviously the person that is managing has a big responsibility because they have to report up to that venture capitalist.
Amelia, let's break it down a little bit, because I think one of the things that comes to my mind is Shark Tank. And I know people in my world have different views on it. Like, we don't like sometimes the way that they interact with the potential entrepreneurs, but it is fun to watch, right? And it's entertainment. It's not exactly how it works. But I was thinking about your description of an angel investor, and it can obviously vary, and it can sometimes be sort of loose. What does the angel investor get out of it? So if I have a business and I need, say, $50,000 to scale it, to take it to the next level, if I'm producing something or making something, and I go to an angel investor and say, I want you to invest X number of dollars, what do they get in return, and what do I owe them? I'm thinking of Shark Tank in my head, and it's probably different than that, but talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so typically angel investors come in very early. It's much more risky because the business is typically not yet quite validated. It tends to be in more like the idea stage. There might not be even a prototype sometimes in place. There might not be even a demand validation out there. So it's a very, very risky time to come into investing. With that said, because of the high risk, they typically tend to want to ask for a higher sort of return because they have to spread their investment across a number of different bets, right? A number of different entrepreneurs out there. And so typically they might ask for a piece of equity, so like a part of the company. And entrepreneurs at the early stages tend to be a little bit less sophisticated, and so sometimes angel investors will bank on that opportunity. Maybe these entrepreneurs don't know that giving away a large chunk of their equity, in the long run can actually be harmful to them. So, but on the other side, for the angel, it's a great opportunity because they might have found, the next sort of, billion-dollar startup opportunity early on. It's much more expensive to come in and invest at later stages in the funding process.
So what happens if, say that example, if I go to you and you agree to invest $50,000 in this idea that I have for this business and it fails, as often they do I have to pay that money back to you, or is that part of the agreement?
Right,
Okay.
that is typically part of the agreement, because on the other hand, if you have to repay it back, that's more of a debt
A loan.
structure, a
Okay.
loan, and those are certainly other forms of investment. I mean, you can go to a bank, and actually I saw this statistic recently that a lot of entrepreneurs in the US, the way that they fund their business is through their personal credit cards, and that is a form of funding that is, debt funding, right? Or you can go to the bank, you can put a loan on a second loan on your house. There's a number of different ways to go about it from a debt standpoint. And those, yes, you do have to repay. So, but you have a lot more freedom because you're not, if the business succeeds, because you're not having to, pay sort of the investor on the other end.
So you take all the risk yourself in that kind of a scenario. If you're borrowing against your 401k or your home, and you get all the returns. So would you all, in the work that you do at the university in your center, do you advise people? Is that part of your role? How do you teach people if they're thinking they have this great idea for a business? Maybe they're in the customer discovery or developing a prototype. What kinds of advice do you give them? And even people who are listening to this podcast, if they have an idea for a business, what would you advise them in terms of, do you put it on your credit card and give it a whirl, or do you try to go out to other community resources and try to get others to invest?
Yeah, so we don't specifically give that advice because those are very personal choices. We never know, what the background is. What we do is we can help them start from a better point. So what we do is we invite a lot of experts. So we have entrepreneurs in residence that we invite, that students and alumni can talk to, who have done it many, many times before. The other thing is we have an accelerator in-house that is very much focused on customer discovery. So CB Inside made a study on many failed businesses, and they found that one of the number one reasons why businesses fail is because there's no demand out there in the market. So entrepreneurs that don't do that homework ahead of time are likely to fail. And we know that entrepreneurship is a very risky, prone to fail type of activity. So what we do, we have this sort of evidence-based approach in which we do a lot of customer research. We do a lot of literally door to door. We get out of the building, to use a term that's used much, and not, rather than stay on campus, do a lot of interviews, ask future potential customers what their issues are, what their problems are. And this is done over a period of time until we actually validate whether there is a demand or not for that particular solution.
So what you're saying is you are, the successful entrepreneur is solving a problem that they're passionate about, that they've taken the time to actually go seek out potential customers. So if it's say a food business, I'm going to come up with my new recipe, and then I'm going to have people try it and say, do you like it? Would you pay X number of dollars for this? What if I offered you a discount? What if you did this? And it's so interesting to hear from you, Amelia. And I think sometimes people underestimate how powerful that can be. I mean, because truly anybody can do that. It could be a university student, it could be a middle school student that was trying to perfect something, but just being open to that feedback, and like you said, following a process can really impact the results and make it much more effective. Would you share with us, Amelia, maybe a business that was started through your program, or tell us about a student that went through the process, and just to kind of give us a person's story that we could maybe connect to or learn from?
Sure. I have lots of ideas, but I'm just trying to think about one student that's a female, because we're female month, so definitely want to celebrate some. So this student had a personal problem. Sometimes, that's where a lot of things come through. Many times healthcare focuses a lot on general other aspects, but dentistry, for example, is one of them, where she had some challenges where in repaying certain payment for some procedures that she was going through. And she realized that she wasn't the only one. So she went out and interviewed a number of different people going through this process that we are talking about to understand what was the issue there. And many times it was a financial sort of repayment structure. So she devised a process and turned it into actually a fintech startup, essentially, and started building around that. And that is where she is now become a full-time founder, recruited a chief technology officer to go into building this process, received some funding actually to actually build this business. But mostly I tell that one particular story because I think it's interesting to see how, starting from where you have seen a problem you feel the pain for, where it's very specific, where you actually have experience in going through it from the beginning to the end of the whole pain process, and how you look at how the challenges that are in place, the hurdles to actually get to the solutions are, and actually how do you overcome those. So she had a very specific use case that she could then turn into through also, going through very specific steps in the growth process to build towards success.
I think that's a great story. And a lot of the training we do with design thinking and methodologies like that is really tapping into empathy, which is really, you have to do more to put yourself in someone's shoes. But if you've actually experienced the problem yourself, you're in a great position to really understand what the customer would need. It reminded me, as you were telling me about that woman student, I was a judge at a Capital One pitch competition several years ago. And one of the business ideas that I thought was very clever that was pitched was parents that had a child that had a physical disability, because they couldn't get like a typical cab or something like that. So they banded together and they were developing this app so that if they had a van that could lift a wheelchair or something like that, that it could be available. So if you're working and your child needs to go somewhere, you could do this. And that I thought was a very creative one, because it's a very niche service, but people that are in that situation really need that. And there's an opportunity to really build a solution to a community that really needs it. So it's fun to hear those stories. That's a lot of, I think, the work that we do, that we're passionate about. I know our producer, Natalia Perez, and I had the opportunity to meet you at the conference that was organized by the Higher Ed Times staff, and we've interviewed them for the program, and they've got a wonderful host of resources. So I'm so happy to be connected to you, Amelia. I'm happy that we are now networked in through the work that we're doing. A lot of the ideas that you shared, especially in terms of your own network where you serve in a volunteer capacity, those are scalable ideas that other states could look to Georgia and the leadership that you have there. So I want to ask you, as we close this out, how can people find out more about your work? Do you want to share a website or something if they want to learn more about you and some of the things that you're working on, or maybe even support or get engaged in one of your programs?
Yes, so we do have, the center has a website, entrepreneurship.emory.edu is links directly to that. But we also, I have my LinkedIn page, and we have this group. We're about to launch, we haven't launched it yet, but we're about to launch a website for the university group. Eventually it's going to be called Innovate Georgia, but it's not quite ready yet.
That's great. So I would encourage everyone who's listening to find you on LinkedIn. I'm also on LinkedIn. Very easy, Rebecca Corbin. I think that really grows our network as well. And I know, using different networking platforms, I've met some very interesting people that share a passion for helping others, quite frankly, through entrepreneurship. So Amelia, I have really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm glad that we can celebrate women entrepreneurship together, along with Natalia, the rest of our staff, and our community around the world. So I wish you a happy day, and hope that everyone who's listened today can dig in a little bit more more, learn more about this, and pursue your own entrepreneurial dreams.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope that you will continue to explore the many ways to define entrepreneurship with NACCE as we celebrate opportunity, failing forward, and success, learning from one another along the way. Subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform and follow at NACCE on social media and learn more about us at nacce.com/podcast. Stay tuned for a new episode each week. We look forward to making our way forward together with you. Have you heard about our latest book, Impact Ed: How Community College Entrepreneurship Creates Equity and Prosperity? This is our roadmap for building back better in 50 states and globally. In each chapter, we share the inspiring stories of everyday entrepreneurs and explain how community colleges play a crucial role in their success. Visit us at nacce.com/impacted to order your copy now and join us in this work.